Dave Grohl has never described their last conversation in full, but the pieces exist. The timing, the tour, the silence that followed. This is not a rumor. It's not a myth. It's a reconstruction based on what we know and what was never said. Because sometimes, the last words aren't dramatic, they're ordinary. And that's what makes them impossible to forget. For 30 years, Dave Grohl carried something he couldn't fully articulate. Interviewers asked, documentaries probed, fans speculated. But the drummer who became a frontman who built Foo Fighters from the as of Nirvana always stopped short when the question came up. What was the last thing Kurt Cobain said to you? The answer existed in fragments. A word here, a gesture there, a moment reconstructed from tour schedules, witness accounts, and the weight of what came after. March 1994. Nirvana's final European tour, Terminal Eins venue in Munich, Germany. The band had just played what would be their last full concert. Kurt was deteriorating. Everyone could see it. Dave saw. Dave didn't say. And that silence became the thing he'd wrestle with for the rest of his life. But before we dive into that night, if you want to explore more untold stories from music history, consider subscribing. The 1994 European tour was supposed to be different. After the Rome incident on March 1st, after the hospitals and cover stories and chaos, Nirvana was back on the road. But this wasn't the band that recorded Nevermind. This was three men moving through the motions while the center was collapsing. Dave Grohl was 25 years old. He'd been Nirvana's drummer for 4 years, long enough to understand the dynamics, short enough that he still felt like the new guy. Kurt was the genius, the voice. Chris was the bridge, the mediator. And Dave was the observer, the one who watched everything fall apart and didn't know if speaking up would help or make it worse. The tour moved through cities like a funeral procession. Some nights, Kurt was present, almost himself. Other nights he was a ghost, operating a guitar. Pat Smear tried to lighten things. Chris attempted interventions disguised as casual check-ins. Dave just played, hit the drums harder than necessary, and tried not to think about what everyone was thinking but nobody was saying. Kurt is not okay. Kurt might not make it. But you don't say those things. So you play the shows, ride the buses, and hope tomorrow will be different. Terminal Eins was an airplane hangar, converted into a concert venue. Massive, industrial, cold. Nirvana played to thousands of German fans who had no idea they were witnessing history's final draft. Kurt's voice was shredded. He wore the same clothes he'd been wearing for days. The same flannel, the same disintegration. Dave watched from behind the drum kit, seeing Kurt's shoulders curve inward, protective, defeated. The setlist was standard. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Heart-Shaped Box, All in Apologies. Songs that meant something once, before they became obligations. Kurt sang them like he was reading someone else's suicide note. After the encore, backstage became a slow-motion evacuation. Kurt sat on a road case, guitar still in his lap, staring at nothing specific. He looked exhausted in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. This wasn't tour fatigue. This was existential depletion. Dave approached carefully, just with the basic human instinct to check on someone who clearly wasn't okay. The conversation that followed wasn't recorded. No cameras captured it, but the framework exists in what Dave has said over the years, in the spaces between his words. Kurt said he was fine. What haunts Dave isn't what Kurt said. It's that he believed him. Those were the words Dave Grohl heard and chose to believe. Because the alternative was too complicated to confront in a German airplane hangar. At midnight after a show neither of them wanted to play. I'm fine, Tibble, definitive. A conversation ender disguised as reassurance. Dave asked, how are you doing? Generic enough to be casual, specific enough to mean, are you going to survive this? And Kurt, sitting on that road case with his guitar and his exhaustion, looked up and delivered the lie that would echo for 30 years. I'm fine. But the delivery mattered more than the words. Kurt didn't say it with conviction. He said it with flat affect. Depression doesn't always look like crying. Sometimes it looks like I'm mind delivered in monotone while your body language screams the opposite. Dave saw it. Later he would admit he saw it. But in the moment, what was he supposed to do? Challenge Kurt? Demand honesty? Force a conversation neither of them were equipped to have? Kurt never made the next 2 shows. The band flew to Rome. The Rohypnol overdose. A coma. The return to Seattle. The intervention attempts. The rehab escape. April 5, 1994. The last conversation they had was Terminal Eins. I'm fine. Those were the last words Dave Grohl heard from the man who defined his 20s. And the question that has haunted Dave ever since is heartbreakingly simple. If I had pushed harder, would it have mattered? Based on tour schedules, Terminal Eins happened March 1st. Based on witness accounts, Kurt was withdrawn but functional. Based on Dave's later interviews, they spoke briefly backstage. Based on timeline analysis, this is the last time they were in the same room before Rome. So what actually happened, beyond I'm fine? Kurt was worried about the tour continuing. He'd expressed concerns to management about his voice, his stamina. Dave was trying to keep things light, avoiding the heavy stuff, because heavy stuff was everywhere already, and nobody said what needed to be said because nobody knew what needed to be said. Kurt didn't announce his suicide. He didn't drop hints. He just said he was fine, picked up his guitar, and walked toward whatever transportation was taking him to the next hotel. Dave watched him go, just like he'd watched him go 100 times before, except this time was last. But you never know when last is happening until it's already happened. And that's the unbearable part. Not that there were dramatic final words left unsaid, but that there were no dramatic words at all, just ordinary checking in, ordinary deflection, and the ordinary guilt of letting someone walk away when everything inside you knows they're not fine. In later interviews, Dave has come closer to describing what he's carried. When asked about guilt, about whether survivors of suicide ever stop wondering if they could have changed the outcome, he paused before answering. He said the last conversation haunts him, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. He said Kurt looked him in the eye and lied, and he let him lie. And they both knew it was a lie, and neither of them acknowledged it. He said I'm fine became the 2 words he hears in Kurt's voice, more than any lyric Nirvana ever recorded. He said he spent 30 years wondering if pushing back would have changed anything. And then he said, probably not, but I'll never know, and that's what I have to live with. What makes Dave Grohl's last conversation with Kurt Cobain so devastating isn't drama. It's the opposite. It's the mundane nature of it. No tearful goodbyes, no prophetic warnings, just 2 guys backstage after a show, one asking how the other is doing, one lying about being fine, both moving on without knowing next was about to end. This is how most last conversations work. They're unremarkable in the moment. They only become significant in retrospect, when you realize you'll never get another chance. Dave Grohl has built an entire career on the foundation of what came after Nirvana. But that success is shadowed by the guilt of survival. Why did I make it? Why did Kurt not? The answer isn't satisfying because there isn't one. Kurt Cobain was in pain, chronic stomach pain, emotional pain, existential pain, that drove him to conclude that burning out was better than fading away. Dave Grohl was not in that specific configuration of pain. That's the only difference. Not talent, not worthiness, not whether someone checked in at the right moment, just pain and the absence of pain. Today, Dave Grohl is vigilant about checking on people. He's public about mental health. He's transparent about therapy. He's the guy who will stop a show if he sees someone in distress in the theater. But those who know the full story understand where that vigilance comes from. It comes from Terminal Eins. It comes from I'm fine. It comes from watching someone walk away and not knowing it was the last time. Kurt Cobain has been dead for 30 years. Dave Grohl has aged into elder statesman territory, the keeper of Nirvana's legacy, the one who gets asked about Kurt in every interview, and the story he tells is always missing the one piece everyone wants, the final conversation, because that conversation wasn't cinematic. It wasn't quotable. It was just 2 exhausted musicians, one asking, one deflecting, both trapped in the inability to say what actually needed to be said. Could Dave Grohl have saved Kurt Cobain? The answer is no. And also maybe. And also the question itself is unfair. Suicide is not something one person can prevent by saying the right thing at the right time. Kurt Cobain's death was the result of accumulated suffering that no single intervention could have unwound. But knowing that intellectually doesn't change what Dave feels emotionally. The guilt of survival isn't logical, so Dave carries it. 30 years later, he carries the last conversation. He carries "I'm fine." He carries the image of Kurt walking away, shoulders curved, exhausted in a way sleep couldn't fix. And he turns that carrying into action. Mental health advocacy, checking on people, being the kind of presence in others' lives that he wishes he'd been more forcefully in Kurt's. It doesn't erase the past, but it makes the present more intentional. The last conversation between Dave Grohl and Kurt Cobain happened in an airplane hangar in Munich on March 1st, 1994. It lasted maybe 5 minutes. It meant everything. It tedged nothing, and it continues, decades later, to remind us that the most important conversations often feel the least important while they're happening. That's why we have to show up for people. That's why we have to push past "I'm fine" when everything else says otherwise. Not because it guarantees a different outcome, but because ordinary words become extraordinary when you realize you'll never get the chance to say different ones.